well, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events tonight. And tonight we have Catherine Coulter. She's going to be talking about her brand new book, Vortex. And just today, we got a bunch of signed copies. So I'll go ahead and put the link, the buy link in the comments field if you'd like to order one before we sell out. And I'll also be monitoring the comments field. So if you have questions for Catherine or Barbara, go ahead and put them in there and I will reemerge towards the end of the program. I'll be happy to ask any of your questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Barbara.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Catherine, what a pleasure to see you again. I love the background.
Pleasure to see you.
Well, thank you. Now, this is a very special occasion because this is the 25th.
I know, isn't that bizarre? It's just unreal.
No kidding. I mean,
but
and,
I would like to,
I
would like to tell, I signed books for you guys, and the Vortex on the inside, if you want to show that again, is that a signed book you're holding, Barbara?
No, it's not. Mine's the advanced reading copy. Patrick will have to show it. Patrick, come back. She wants you to show something.
That's okay. You'll just notice on the Vortex that I wrote my name along the circle there, so it's pretty cool.
Oh, look at that. That is very cool. Well, thank you. That took extra care. Wow. So this all started, as a matter of fact, way back. There's a very good article, which I've stolen from in a publication called The Big Thrill, which is part of the International Thriller Writers Association. Mm-hmm. And they did a deep interview with Catherine, so I'm going to steal from it slightly. The Cove is the book that started it all back in 1996. And it says here, Catherine, that you credit serendipity and the form of your sister for its inspiration. So what's that all about?
Well, we were back in Texas for a family reunion, and my sister, and she's never done this before or since, she waltzes up to me and said, "Have you ever heard of a little town in Oregon called the Cove? They make the world's greatest ice cream and bad stuff happens." And I went on point, you know, and the publisher didn't want to hear about it because, of course, I was known for the long historical romances. But to be honest, I had written 9 books in 2 years, no, in 3 years. And they were all trilogies. They were 3 different trilogies, and I was burned to my heels. So, you know, I had enough clout, I guess you could say, to insist on doing it. So they said, okay, well, we want to make it a hardcover. And I said, no, are you nuts? Because you can fail in anything, but not hardcover. So it first came out in paperback and did, thank you, God, and did very, very well.
So that's super well.
Yeah. And their very next question was, when is the second one? And I said, what do you mean the second one? This isn't, you know, they said, well, this is a series. When's the second one? I said, no. And then, and everybody thinks I'm lying. I seriously am not. There was this voice in the back of my head that said, Catherine, what about me? And it was Savage. He appears in the last third of The Cove, and he was a FBI computer nerd, basically. And of course, tough and macho as he is. So J.T. Ellison, who was a co-writer of mine on the Brit series, we were talking about, and she said, well, you know, a series isn't a series until the 4th book. And I said, nah, how can that be? But she was totally correct. On the 4th book, you know, the 2nd and 3rd book had very little of Savage and Sherlock in the 3rd one. And then the 4th book, it took off. So she was totally correct on that. So if anybody's listening who's thinking about a series, it's the 4th book where it goes live.
There's actually an interesting curve. I remember dimly taking statistics, much against my will, at Stanford, and there's a kind of a curve. Well, let me tell you, it's a really, because I've had this conversation with I don't know how many authors. Your first book starts out and it does really well. Most of the time, the second book, not always, but most of the time, the second book is a drop because all those expectations that everybody, you know, had and enjoyed with a new voice and new characters and a new series isn't there. And so it drops. And then the 3rd book oftentimes drops. So you're going like this, but then the 4th book is the one that rises back up. But, you know, I also had a thought, Catherine, while you were saying that, which is up until the 4th book, you've written a trilogy. And a trilogy is just so common, because we tend to think of 3-act plays and whatever it is, that maybe in part it's the fourth book that, lets everybody know that it isn't going to just be
Oh,
a
that's a
trilogy.
good, I'd never thought of that.
Me either
So
until you said that.
the trilogy cycle. I had not even considered that. So thank you. I will not consider it.
Okay, well, it just came to me in a flash.
You're really smart.
Well,
like you're right.
we had this Diana Gabaldon and I had this conversation when she published her, Outlander, her first novel, and it was intended to be a trilogy. And now we're coming to book 9. And, it was really once we got to book 4 that in fact the initial idea of the trilogy went away. But I am told, and I don't know if this is true because we don't do a huge amount with romance, but I have a romance specialist called John, who's very good. And as I understand it, many romance readers will not read a 3-book set until the 3rd book is written because they don't want, to get invested in it and be disappointed if the author doesn't finish it. So oftentimes in romance, you have to write the whole trilogy and then, it's presented. So
now I'm not familiar with that. I mean, I've never thought about it and I've never experienced it to the best of my knowledge. That's interesting.
Well, I think it is too. Now I'm going to digress for a moment from the Vortex because Catherine and I did this last year and it was so exciting to discover that we were bonded by the author Georgette Hare, Heyer pronounced.
And you pronounced it just like I do. That's correct.
And this is a really crappy edition, I must say, of one of her books that I love called The Grand Sophie, which I'm sure Catherine loves because the heroine in it is fabulous. And there's a particularly great line when a woman draped in emeralds comes into a room and the heroine's uncle, who's looking after her, surges forward to meet a guest so worthy of his notice. I just love the way she does that. But Catherine wrote books, Regency romances, and I read your first Regency romance, which I really enjoyed. So I guess my question is, did writing the romances, do you think, set you up to write 25 books about 2 characters? Because you gained a lot of experience doing that.
No.
I
don't. No,
okay, you shot me down. Tell me what happened.
Well, I wrote 6 Regencies and I wrote them because I knew Georgette Hare cold. I knew, and of course my master's degree is in early English 19th century history. And this is the Regency period. I knew it cold. I knew it all cold, which is why I fit so well when I first started writing, because of course you want to limit the unknowns when you're trying something new. And so that's really why I wrote the Regencies. And when I went to the long historicals, which added humor and mystery, because my brain seems to work that way with mysteries. Most of the long historicals do have mysteries in them. And I never really gave it a great deal of thought. As I said, my sister gave me the idea and that was it. And then the next book was Sherlock's book, basically. I mean, of course he's there, but it was her book. And it was never, Barbara, at that time I was going back and forth writing an FBI suspense and then writing a historical romance, because I found that it would keep your brain unconstipated, to go to such disparate genres from one to the other. And then eventually, as I got older, I couldn't do 2 books a year. I'm doing 1. And of course, the biggest sellers are the thrillers, and that's what the house wanted. And to get my historical romance fix, I now write a novella a year. So, and that'll be out in paperback in January. And that's not here or there, neither here nor there. But no, I don't think it ever set me up. It was simply something that happened and grew, and the characters are real. Their lives are real. They mean a great deal to me, what happens to them and how they behave and all the strange and wonderful things they get into. Thank you.
Well, I guess I was really thinking that having written characters, which after all are what power a romance more than plot, because basically romances have more or less a single plot, that it might have made it more enjoyable and easier for you to write to write characters. And who knew that Bridgerton was going to come along and, and suddenly throw us all into the Regency romance thing. And not only that, but Sanditon, Jane Austen that she didn't finish, had a season in which nobody did the math because the money involved in the production of Sanditon in terms of developing the seaside, I'm here to tell you, was absolutely so far off. Nobody had that kind of money. Jeff Bezos wouldn't have had that kind of money back when that was written. But I'm told that there will be a sequel to Sanditon. So, who knows? Maybe some of the earlier romances, the Regencies, there'll be like a gold rush for them.
So we don't know who's going to write it?
What, the second Sanditon? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going way past Jane Austen, because I mean, she was done with the original book. I've often thought that maybe hair is just a tad melodramatic. Some of them certainly are, like the Talisman Ring for television. But if Bridgerton really does interest people in this era and its fabulous costumes and clothes, which is one of the really good reasons to do television, we might see more of it. So there we are. But we're here to talk about number 25, Vortex. And tell me, they have two different stories. I mean, Savage is working one and Sherlock's working another. Who started it in this book? Did they come to you simultaneously, or did one story start you off and then you kind of went from there?
It was it was the dead girl, the dead friend, Serena Winters, who came to me and she said, help me. And I said, okay, I will. And it was that simple. And then everything else just came out of it. Mia came out of it. And then, her disappearance, and then what happened. So it was the dead girl, Serena Winters, who was just, so her name was already set because I knew who she was. And I just, I hope that I kind of made myself cry at the end, but that's all right.
Well, if it makes you cry, it will certainly make other people cry. But that's fascinating that, you have all these characters just sort of circulating around in your head. Does that ever?
Oh, some of them drive Porsches like Savage, and they're zooming here and there and yawn and go away, leave me alone for a minute, and they never do. They never do. They're always running around.
So what kind of discipline do you employ in order to be able to focus on one to write something if the rest of them are careening around driving Porsches or whatever?
I'm writing the book for next year. It's called Reckoning. And I'm not totally sure what's going to happen here or there are two plots. They will not come together. And neither did the two plots in Vortex. They did not come together. Sometimes they do, they dovetail, which is really cool. But we'll see what happens because, when you don't know the whole story, you have to do a lot of rewriting as you get ideas, as the characters tell you, well, let's do this. How about that? How about that? And then if it doesn't work, you have to rewrite. So I'm constantly editing and going back, but it's the only way I can work. It's the only way. Everybody's different, as you know.
Absolutely true. And in fact, the book we talked about last year, the stories did come together. In that little seaside town, there was a convergence.
Now, which one was this?
It was last year's book.
Oh, yes, you're right. You're totally correct. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm blanked on the title because wait, I'll look up the title because the publisher hopefully tells us.
Yeah, it's Deadlock.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So I remember when I read it and when we talked about it, I was interested that, the plots converged, but realistically, they can't always, right?
No, they can't. Well, I'm not able to do it. So, well, the CIA agent in Iran hardly goes together with a political reporter in New York City. That was kind of a stretch.
Well, I agree. And, I've always remembered years and years and years ago, after Michael Connelly wrote 4 books, which were all personal to Harry Bosch. And he said to me, I want to write a 5th book. And he said, Bosch is going to work it just because he's a cop and he catches a case. It's not going to have any personal connection. And that was the Trunk. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Trunk Murder. Something.
It was Angel's Fault. No.
No, it was
No.
the fifth book. It was I think it's called
Oh.
the trunk something or other. But and I remember it because the body is found in the trunk of a car parked up on Mulholland or something, and Harry just gets it. But that would certainly be true of Savage and Sherlock, that they would be assigned cases. It's called trunk music. Thank you, Patrick. He's always saving me by looking things up and using the chat feature here. But I mean, inevitably they're going to have cases that are completely separate rather than cases that converge, just because that's what happens when you're in law enforcement. So it seems quite credible that you don't have to stretch to do that. So let's talk about the political one, because in many ways that's a case kind of ripped from headlines, what actually happens there with a young girl.
Oh, in Vortex, Mia Briscoe and the guy running for mayor. Yeah, that was interesting. And it was written before all the hoopla,
Yeah,
happened.
but I mean, it's not giving anything away because it's very early in the book. But there have been a lot of news coverage of fraternity parties or similar that get out of hand, and girls who either rashly or involuntarily or unluckily wind up in a bad situation. Sometimes with that. Did you see that there was I saw it today and I could hardly believe this, that there was a court, I'm trying to remember where it was, an appeals court in Switzerland that ruled that the rapist deserved a reduced sentence because the rape had only lasted for 11 minutes and the girl wasn't that badly hurt. And I thought, seriously? The length of time has anything to do with what we're talking about?
You're making this up. Please
I
tell me.
am not. It was in the Wall Street Journal today. I almost fell over when I read it.
In Switzerland.
It said it was a Swiss appeals court. I think she might have been, I don't remember, German or whatever, but I mean, they made a particular point of saying that the guy deserved a reduced sentence because the rape had only lasted 11 minutes. Well,
Well, what happened? What happened? Did they go for it?
Yeah, no, he was awarded that. I mean, but that was the rationale that the judge or the tribunal, I don't remember which it was, used to reduce his sentence, was the relatively short duration of the rape. And the girl wasn't hurt that badly. And I thought, what does that have to do, with basic issues of rape? I mean, really. So I read it to my husband. I was incredulous, when I read this little gem. And then I thought about your story, and, I'm sure it never occurred to you that the length of time that the violence was perpetrated on this girl, was critical. I mean, it was that it happened at all.
Yeah. Oh, that's insane. I've got to post that on Facebook tomorrow and hear all the outrage from readers.
I'll see if I can find it and send you the exact language, because, but anyway, so here is this unfortunate girl in the wrong.
The Wall Street Journal, so I'll look it up. It was
Okay.
today's Wall Street Journal?
It's in one of those small, how they'll have a photo and then 3 or 4 news things underneath it. And it's in one of the, I'm sure the Arizona Republic didn't run to that. I mean, they're just not doing quite that deep international coverage that the journal sometimes does. So here's your girl in an unfortunate situation, and we leave her in what appears to be a really bad place. So what you're really writing about is the aftermath.
Yes. It's 7 years later, and it's the aftermath and what happens through the serendipity of a friend's little kid finding her ancient cell phone. And there were pictures from the rave where Serena was roofied, and then the fire was started and she was never found. And so that was serendipity, but it's an amazing thing to have happen. And it makes sense. I mean, I would believe that, so it was, how would you, I thought, well, how do you feel about this? How do you feel that there's not a chance that you have something and you can go after it? So I was really rooting for Mia, that she would have the grit and the determination and the brain to figure it out. And then when she sees the politician with that bracelet, that was some more serendipity. But then I think she acted very well in that.
I
Very
do
well.
too. No, Mia is a really admirable character. And it's interesting to follow her quest through this. But you're also writing in that story, Catherine, you're really writing about entitlement, the real, a real sense of entitlement on the part of the perps in this
Yeah.
particular case. And that has come up in, various,
Kind of like homo.
right.
Yeah. Like
Well,
homo.
politicians, fraternity boys, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen
Yeah.
it over and over again. I mean, we're seeing it with Governor Cuomo right now in New York I mean, not to say that it was anything that extreme, but nonetheless. And, I think there's a class difference, oftentimes comes into play, that sense of entitlement. It depends. We're going to be talking to an author later this week, a debut novel, and she said it in a fictional university she calls Duquette, but she really based it on Vanderbilt or Wake Forest or Duke, one of the Southern elite universities, where, that kind of entitlement can run rampant among girls and boys, I might say, because the girls can actually be even worse in a lot of ways. And
actually, I know some people who are not wealthy or privileged, and they have the same entitlement. They have the same feeling of entitlement. What? No. So I don't think that you can. That's too blanket a generalization, I think.
well, it
I
isn't.
have relatives like that.
There you are. Well, I mean, it isn't always about money. Some of it's about talent, some of it's about intelligence, some of it is about, a lot of different things. But especially if you are at a university, there's a real mix of people there, and some of them are going to be more entitled, more talented, more brilliant, whatever, than others. And so you wind up with a kind of a class system, not based on birth particularly, but based on a number of factors. So
Depends on the university, don't you think?
oh yeah, absolutely. I thought when I was an undergraduate, for example, and I don't know the real story, but my university allowed fraternities, but had banned sororities. So the girls got to draw lots as to where they lived, didn't get, at least at the outset, didn't get to pick your roommate, didn't get to pick where you lived. Whereas the boys who already had, more social organization got to live in fraternities. So the normal inequity was even wider than you might
Why
think.
weren't there any sororities?
Sorry?
Why weren't there any sororities?
Well, the rumor was that, and I have no way to know that this was true, but during the rush, which is what sororities call it, as opposed to hazing and what fraternities call it, that a prominent politician's daughter committed suicide because things didn't go her way. And it led to a ban. But it was also true that Mrs. Stanford had a will that was broken after I graduated, but it had all kinds of rules in it, like women had to be in by 10, but men had no curfews. Women were not allowed to wear anything but skirts and stockings on campus. We used to run around when we got up late in our slips with a raincoat thrown over it if we didn't have time to actually get dressed, that kind of thing. So she was really a Victorian. And
She was.
Yeah, no, she really was. And
was
boy, that's right. You
like-
lived there, so yeah. And so she had all kinds of rules for the women that increased the difference between the male students and the female students. And there were far fewer women on campus when I went there in 1958 than, eventually were true. And almost no minority students at all. And very few scholarship students. So, it was totally different than it would be today.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting to hear. I didn't know that.
Well, as I say, I'm not sure what the real story was, but I do know for sure
That's
that
good.
there were no sororities, but there were fraternities, and that gave the boys even more leverage. than they might have had if there had been any sort of female organization to, to counteract that. So let's go to Savage. What's up with him in this story?
Well, he gets, one thing that was a lot of fun was going into the CIA. And when I was speaking to the people in the CIA to get information, I said, I'm sorry, but I've got to do you wrong. And they said, oh, we're used to it. Oh, we're used to it. Don't worry about it. And it's still, I think that people are going to be surprised, though, at how I ended it. But Savage, he's very smart, and what is really admirable about him is he can read people well, and he can like almost preternaturally figure out how to navigate this system. Like he had the two CIA guys in interview, and he could wheedle his way around them. He could handle things very well. I've always admired him for that ability, because so few of us have it in spades like he does. He very rarely makes an ass of himself, whereas I do it maybe 17 times a day. So it's nice to admire somebody and have somebody like that in your life that you can look up to. But I really enjoyed Olivia. Her life was so different. It was so very different. And it was hard to understand. And of course, I'm sure that I did not. How could I get into the brain of somebody who flies into Iran to exfiltrate a spy? How can you really understand that person from the inside out? Well, you can't. You just try your best, and you try to make the reader believe it. Believe that they're there. Believe that our heroine knows what she's doing, what happens to her, and how she reacts is logical and reasonable, and you want her to win. And that's all. That's really the best you can try for, And you mentioned the historical romances. I've written so many of them. And I'm very character dominated. Yeah. And I think that most readers, particularly women readers, are far more interested in interpersonal stuff and more focused on people rather than just technology, or this happens, blow up, that they like to see people's lives and what they're doing and how they're thinking and how they behave in certain situations. And I have no idea where I was going with that.
Well, I'm going to ask you this. Do you think that more of your readers are women, or do you think that this is a gender neutral series in terms of the fans?
Oh, no. Reading is not gender neutral. I mean, 85% of readers are women, for heaven's sakes, particularly fiction. But the best I can tell is probably about 70-30. Best I can guess, women over men readers.
I think that's so interesting. Say, I have a gender neutral bookstore. The staff is almost equally divided, and our customers are almost equally divided between the sexes. So my picture of readers is somewhat different than the normal. And it may be, part of it is that we have always done a lot of military fiction. We've always done authors like Tony Hillerman, who certainly was a gender neutral author. Women and men both loved books by Hillerman, and Clive Cussler is another one. But we may have tilted more towards men than women over time. So I'm always slightly incredulous when people say, no, most of my readers are women when we're talking about thrillers. I understand in romance that would be true. In science fiction, I'm not sure that it's not relatively gender neutral too.
I would say that more so. I would guess more so on that. It's just that I know my readership, and I can tell primarily from Facebook.
Okay.
And the fan letters I get. But I will tell you, whenever I get a fan letter from a guy, and I do get quite a few, I've been asked on so many dates. Anyway, that's not important. But they will usually, I've had maybe half a dozen over the years say, I cannot believe that a woman wrote this. You used a man, didn't you? So you get something like that and you go, well, whoa, okay. Well, I made it in your little jaundiced, sexless eyes. I'm so thrilled. And I do what Robert Crace said we should do. Do you know what that? Well, I can't say it. I can't say it. we're live. I can't say what his advice was. Never mind. So let's not go there.
All right. Now, I know we're trying to stay, family rated, but occasionally things, if you have Karen Slaughter talking to you, you just have to go ahead with the R rating and not even worry about it. But there we are. So over the years that you have been writing this series, and this is going to seem like a ridiculous question, but if you've been listening to what she said, it isn't so ridiculous. Do your characters surprise you? Do Savage and Sherlock deal you some real surprises?
Yes, they do. They come up with stuff that I swear that I would never think of. And of course, that sounds awfully stupid, and indeed it is, since they're part of my brain, but I'm not aware on a conscious level that what they're doing is something that I really didn't consider. And what I would have considered the way to go would be totally wrong. But then they just scooch me over, and every writer tells you this. I know that that's true. So many times a writer doesn't know what's going to happen. And I can always tell when I'm making a mistake is when I hit a page and it won't go the characters won't move. And I know every author tells you this. They will not move, and it means you got to back up and let them do what they want. And that sounds so silly, but it's true of every author I know.
Well, I think this then answers the question, which almost always comes up, is whether you plot your books out or whether you start somewhere and see where it goes.
No, I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. But on the other hand, when JT and I wrote the 6 books in the international thriller series, we had to plot them out.
Right.
And I remember we sat across from each other and we plotted out from chapter 1 to 99. So, and she's a pantser too, but we could do it together. We could do it. But as a rule, I simply can't write that way. And my brain just doesn't come up with plots like that.
Sure. But if you're collaborating, you do have to have a framework. I think it would be impossible. Otherwise, you'd go this way, she'd go that way, and you'd never get back to center. I've spent quite a lot of time talking to JT this year. We've been having some great conversations, mostly with Jane Ann Krentz involved, about the Gothic, the rise of the Gothic, and what that actually means. And JT, in fact, I should get my copy, has started a series writing as Josh Walker,
yes.
with this wonderful woman, Jane, who's a CIA librarian, which I think is a really wonderful idea. And strangely enough, we're back to Vanderbilt University, because Jane is in fact a librarian at Vanderbilt University when perusal of manuscripts in the stacks gets her into trouble. And she ends up working for the CIA. You just got to love it. And it's an interesting self-publishing venture too, which I've given her some advice on about how best to go about that, because it's no matter how experienced you are as a published author, if you haven't done it yourself, there's a whole world there that you need to learn the publishing side of it, as opposed to just the writing side of it.
I will listen to Barbara Freethy, and she's talking about how she's, and I just stare at her like she's from another universe as far as I'm concerned,
Right. You just write the books. You don't have to do the rest of it. COVID has made some interesting revelations and renovations, let's say, in the whole publishing system, with people working at home and communication lines completely different than they are. This is, I mean, we've done over 500 Zoom events since this started. And I'm always learning as we do them. From authors and, from readers and so forth, about things that in the before times, like, Tolkien, before, capital B, T.
BC.
Times, yep, BT, that we might never have discovered. So I think while COVID has been a tremendous interrupter, it's also an innovator. And, we've had to innovate. And I think that things will be different going forward as a consequence of all this, but clearly not for you if you're writing book 26, which is really good news for everybody. And also,
one thing during COVID, so much of my life did not change at all, because I go downstairs and I have my office in my home, so I work anyway. But one thing that was totally different is we went on hikes every day, every day. And of course, it's so beautiful in the Sausalito area and the Marin area. There's so many trails, and we still hike every day.
Do you ever hike over the Golden Gate just for a change of pace?
You don't want to do that? Do you know why? Have you ever done it?
I've done it many times.
Oh, okay. Well, the noise is so absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't do it more than once.
I'm sure that the noise, when I say I've done it many times, mostly it was a long time ago. My husband's brother, you will love this, actually lived on a houseboat in Sausalito for quite a long time. And when I was young, my father he was a president of General Telephone and Electronics when they were building up the company, and California was a big part of it. And for some reason, we always ended up in Sausalito looking back at San Francisco for dinner at a number of very well-known Sausalito restaurants. I'm trying to remember the one where green goddess salad dressing was invented. You probably can tell me that.
No, I can't. Are you thinking?
Well, it'll come to me. It's one of the oldest restaurants in Sausalito, and my dad knew the owner quite well. So even when I was a kid, I used to be driven over to Sausalito. And it was so great because you would look back across the bay of San Francisco, and if conditions were right, the fog would start coming in under the Golden Gate. And it was almost like it was a theatrical performance where, there was like a cloud machine, because it would just burst underneath the bridge and start engulfing the bay. And you could be sitting there and all of a sudden everything was shrouded in fog. It was just wonderful. And I'll tell you another really bizarre fact.
Always changing. It's never the same.
Yeah, I also learned, this is crime discussion, right? So I can say this, a really bizarre fact. I can't remember if it was Ridley Pearson, because he has a book where the title charts in the Bay are important, or whether it was Marcia Muller, who's written a lot of Sharon McCone books set in San Francisco. But anyway, apparently, of all the people who have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to their death, everyone has jumped facing San Francisco. None has jumped facing out towards the ocean, which I think is just an amazing comment on human nature.
How do they know this?
I guess from the position of the bodies or visual reports or whatever it is, but it seems to be a fairly well established. And think about that. If you were going to do that, would you jump into a void, or would you jump, into what you knew? I mean, I think it's a psychologically really interesting question, and it probably isn't quite that absolute, but that's the way it was presented.
Now, let me ask a question. Your brother's friend lived on a houseboat in Sausalito?
No, my husband's brother lived on a houseboat.
What's his name?
He sold it many years ago, and he's now deceased. His name is Rosenwald.
Rosenwald. I will tell you why I'm asking is because a very dear friend of mine has finally, after 3 years, it took 3 years to write a book on Sausalito houseboats, because she's lived on one since 1974.
Well, she would have known him then.
Yes, Rosenwald. In fact, I will ask her, because it's a beautiful coffee table book in black and white with photos going back to the 70s and 80s. And people are telling their story. If you want to sell it, I will have her send you a copy.
Sure, that would be wonderful. And I'll see if I can remember. I used to have the slip address, because when you would send things to him, the address was somewhat complicated, and there's a whole marina where the houseboats are tied.
Rosenwald.
Peter is his first name. Yep.
Rosenwald was his first name.
Mm-hmm. No. His name is Peter Rosenwald.
Gotcha.
And I don't know who he sold. He sold the boat to, but I think it might have been 20 more years ago, but nonetheless within the scope of her book.
Oh, good. Well, it would be, he lived there. When did he live there?
I'll have to ask, but I'm thinking it would have been certainly in the 90s and possibly the 80s, probably the 80s, now that I think about it.
Then she knew him, I'm sure. She
Yeah,
was.
no, she probably would have.
All right,
Hey,
I will have her send you a book and I'll write a little note in it, and it might be very interesting for your husband too.
yeah,
To see
no, it
this.
definitely could be. I mean, I visited him on the boat, had drinks on the boat, dinner on the boat, but I mean, Sausalito is a wonderful harbor. And in fact, the whole San Francisco Bay Area is absolutely gorgeous. So you've told us that you're writing a new book for next year and a new historical. You don't really see any end then for Savage and Sherlock. You're still having fun with it.
In the we'll see, because The Reckoning is the second book on a 2-book contract. And then I think I don't want to sign any more contracts. I want to simply write what I want to write. And if it's more Savage and Sherlock, fine. But I just want to be free. I don't want any obligations. I want them to put it on myself and just see where I want to go. So I mean, you're the first person I have said this to. So, and obviously you won't tell anyone.
No, not at all. It will be just between us. And you know what? You've earned that. I mean, if you've written 26 books about these people, then I certainly think you have earned the right to decide whether you want to write more about them, and undoubtedly you will because they clearly haunt you, or whether you want to write something else, but write it in your own time.
Yes, and it might be another historical romance because I love doing them with mysteries, of course. So we'll see. I have no idea because this book is a bear, and we'll see.
Right. And sometimes when you're writing a book that's a bear, other ideas come to you out of desperation because you're trying to wrestle the bear, and who knows where it all goes. So I think with writers, I never say never. It's just not a good idea to be absolute.
Correct. It could be science fiction. I've been getting some weird ideas lately. So we'll see. Why not?
Can't be any weirder than the world we've been living in for the last while. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. Patrick, why don't we call you up and see whether you have questions or comments from the audience or questions of your own?
Well, let's see. I have been asking them to submit questions.
Then you should make it up. You should say, yes, we have so many questions. Let me pick out a couple.
Well,
get it together, Patrick.
Yeah, I have a question for you regarding regarding all the kind of FBI lore. Do you have some good sources that you can rely on to keep you updated on all that stuff?
Yes, I do. I've been with the same person for, I don't know, 14, 15 years, and she has the absolute gall to retire next year. If I need, for example, that there's a special unit in the FBI that is called in when a baby is stolen from a nursery. Okay. It's called the card unit. I had no idea how they operated. Within an hour, I was speaking to the supervisor of the card team so I could find out everything and make it accurate. So she is my princess. She hooks me up with anybody I need, even with the CIA, who really hate to talk. But they're used to being cast as the bad guy, so that was all right.
Wow. I think that's a sad comment all the way around on the CIA and their expectations, but right.
Well, they're always the pigs. It's just amazing how they're always so considered such. Well, I can't say these words aloud unless I'm Karen. Karen, would you say it for me? Yes, they're such assholes. There we go. Thank you, Karen.
Well done.
Let's see. Tony asks, how did the collaboration with JT Ellison come about? And how do you enjoy that collaboration? Has it been challenging, or what's it been like?
Well, we're going back to 2012. We're going back to 9 years ago now. And I got this whole idea about a Brit, and I knew his mother, his father. I knew that he was a Viscount. I knew the name of the butler. I knew everything about it, but I knew that I could not write 2 books a year that were contemporary thrillers. So I called Clive Cussler. And I said, Clive, help, tell me what to do, because you write with a lot of people, tell me what to do. And he did. And I remember he said, "Now, I'm not cheap like Jimmy." And he's talking about Patterson, of course. And he gave me his protocol, and it sounded good to me. And so it ended up very strangely. Actually, I had told my not my agent about this, and he said, "Oh, Catherine, don't worry. We have somebody in house. Don't worry about it." And I wanted to just punch him out, like, yeah, right, sure. So, and I asked people all around the country to recommend people. And then my husband and I each had 20 separate suspense thriller books, because that's what I wanted, with somebody published, not unpublished, published. Independent of each other, we picked J.T. Ellison. We had never, either of us had ever heard of her or read her. She's totally, totally different from me. She calls herself an introverted navel gazer. And then I'm the extrovert. I'm the big, dialogue, character heavy and all this. But as a matter of fact, it works fine. We email every day today. I called off the series after 6 books because it had run its course to me. And I tell people, I said, honestly, I couldn't come up with any more really inventive ways to kill either Nicholas or Michael. So forget it, Mikola, forget it. So it was a very positive experience. I would say 90% are not. They lead to hatred and vitriol and extraordinary unhappiness. So any writer who is considering doing this, be super careful. Spell out everything. Be sure exactly about what you want to do. And I will tell you another thing that worked out too, that I think is so important, given the extraordinary vitriol politically today, is get someone of your own political persuasion. Otherwise, you're going to run into myriad problems, which I know about many of them. And since we agree on so many things, we have more of a meeting of the mind. We will deal with a situation with the same perspective, I guess you could say. And I will shut up, because that's really more than you ever wanted to know, Patrick.
Not at all. We were the home of Clive Cussler and all of his co-authors. And mostly it was always a positive experience for them.
It's funny. I remember, Catherine, when you came into the Poison Pen, I think you might have been in town for the Arizona Kidney Foundation luncheon some years ago.
Yep.
And I remember you were asking some of the staff for thriller writers that we could recommend to you as potential candidates. Yeah.
So this would have been how long ago?
I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe?
It would have to be, about 10 years ago. Yeah.
You were a guest at the Kidney Foundation lunch. And so that, you were in town for that.
Gotcha. All right. That timing is about right.
Yeah. And, we used to read books and recommend authors to Clive. A couple of his co-authors are authors that I recommended to him, because I knew the moment I read them that they'd be a good fit for Clive. I have a question, which I forgot to ask you. And again, it comes from this excellent interview in The Big Thrill, but what are your 3 favorites of the books in the series that you have written? I have the answers here, so if you can't remember, I can read them.
No, I don't remember.
Okay, well, I'm going to make it simple. You say, all right, my top 3 faves are The Target.
Yeah.
Right. Backfire and Nemesis. The Target and Backfire feature federal judge Ramsey Hunt and his finding a 6-year-old girl in the forest who was physically and sexually abused. In Backfire, 5 years have passed and there are still more bad guys ready to cause mayhem. Nemesis is one of my favorites because Sherlock kicks big butt all by herself, and the story is relevant and filled with intriguing characters. The villain is one of the most complex characters I've ever met. Not, of course, that you wrote him, but you just happened to meet him, right? So he got into the book. Is that how
I
that
knew
worked?
him. I knew him very well.
You did.
Yeah.
Okay. I love the way you talk about it. You know, it's as though these are all people who are wandering around loose on the streets of Sausalito or swimming in the bay or, you know, hiking over the Golden Gate in the traffic noise, and Catherine somehow runs into them. Love it. Anything else there, Patrick?
I would still pick those three.
Yeah.
So the book that I'm doing right now, The Reckoning, we have the hunts here again.
Ah,
And more, I'm not going to give anything away because I have an idea where it's going, but it involves Emma again, the little girl, only now she's 12. Now she's 12. And she'll be playing at Kennedy Center. It's a Chopin retrospective. And she's a prodigy, a child prodigy, of course.
hey, wonderful.
Huh?
I said, that's wonderful. And you also make me realize another question I forgot to ask, but clearly not everybody's aging in real time. If at book 25, Emma's progressed 6 years. So we already know the answer to that question. No.
Well, they have, you know, the cases are not one case a year. They're like 6 cases a year.
Sure.
You know, whatever. I mean, it's like 2 weeks later or something. So if I get stuck in winter, I'm kind of stuck. I might fudge it there and get to spring pretty fast, but it's not one book a year like Kinsey Milhone did, you know, the one book a year. So we'll see. We'll see.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question from Linda, who asks, does your husband write under his own name?
Right, what?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I think she's under the impression that he's a writer too, but he's not. He's not.
No, he edits my books.
I see.
He's a doctor, actually. He's a physician.
So he writes scripts. That's about it.
Yeah, and he's the editor from hell, I like to say. He's
and
very
lucky you to have him.
Well, in theory, that's always true.
Let's see. That's about it for real questions. So there are a number of people just saying how much they like your work and what big fans they are. That's about it for questions.
So Catherine, do you find that daily posting to Facebook is just part of your workday? Because you're very good on Facebook. Yes,
and it's always enjoyable. I think what it kind of evolved into is I'm like what's the middle of the wheel? I'm the center part of the wheel, and it's a community has gathered around me, and they use me as the forum, and they're interested in each other's lives, right? So there are maybe 40 people who are there all the time, and they're talking to each other. They will say something to me because I think they have to. And then you have people who are outside the circle. And I find that if they keep coming back, then they're slowly integrated into this huge and bigger community. And it's wonderful. I know these people. I know their names. I don't know them all, but I get to know, their lives and what's happening. And they're just the biggest supporters, and they love to read, and they love the books, the characters. They love what's not to love, what's not to enjoy. And so every morning, I try to, I still post a photo a day on Instagram and on Facebook. It's the same thing, and write about it. And everybody likes to comment on them. And because it's a view of a walk from every day that I do. Started it during COVID when we were all housebound and we were hiking, by ourselves. And it's just continued. And it's really it's fun to do. And to see all these people, used to be you get a fan letter and you think, oh, fine. Well, dear, blah, blah, thank you so much, blah, 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 blah. But these are like real people, and they're in your life nearly every day. So it's a lot of fun. And I hear people complaining about how I have to do social media now. Well, come on, don't be an idiot. Find something that you enjoy. Like I found the Facebook connection very, very enjoyable, and not any other form. Forget it. And I've never been to the family Facebook page because it holds no interest for me. But I would strongly recommend that if you want to enrich your life, then this is the way to do it. And you are the focal point of all this group of people. And it's very cool.
There's
Wonderful.
do you
And it's
post a
about
lot of,
30 minutes every morning.
do you post a lot of photos? Because I have somebody saying how much they like your photos.
I post a photo every day, started doing it. It's on the daily hike. And
Okay.
because we have such beautiful, beautiful scenery here. I do a lot of the Golden Gate and the Marin Headlands and just beautiful. So yeah. And people seem to like it. And they say, oh yeah, I've been there. Oh yeah, you know, it's wonderful.
I got a few more last questions that just came in. I think we
Did you
guilt
guilt
tripped them
people?
in. Yeah, Lizzie Bella, she says, are you ever going to write his romantic historical fiction again? And then Tony asks, which 3 books would you take on a desert island?
That Tony should take on a desert island?
No, which 3 would you take on a desert?
Oh, I would take Harry Potter 1 and 2 and part 2 of Deathly Hallows. I'd take. I really love Harry Potter, needless to say.
And the audiobooks. My husband absolutely is addicted to the audiobooks of Harry Potter. He thinks the guy that read them is just magical and has, you know, wonderful voices and so forth. So I keep thinking that one of these days, but I'm afraid if I get into it, I'll just drive aimlessly around in the car and never get anything done. So I'm a little worried, but it does sound, it's great that you can experience the story in different ways. You know, you can read the book, which is my favorite, but you can listen to the audio book, and increasingly you can watch a dramatization of some form on long view TV.
Yeah.
Which I like way better than movies for most books. So occasional books do make a really good movie, but I think most books do better in long form television. Just my thing. But
no, I agree with you. No,
Hmm?
I'll never forget when they did a movie on Janet Ivanovich's first Stephanie Plum book, and it was so horrible. It was so horrible, and she was so embarrassed. She was very, very embarrassed and just totally turned off by the whole thing. Now, you've read Stephanie Plum, right?
Janet is here frequently. Yep.
Yeah, and you know Grandma
Mazur, my late mother's favorite character. She absolutely loved Grandma Mazur.
Well, can you
and
imagine
aspired
Debbie
to be like her,
playing
I have to say.
Can you imagine Debbie Reynolds playing her? Anyway, it was
No.
very bad. It was very bad. But it's, so I agree with you totally. If they could make a book and they used the book and they made it like 8 parts, that would be better. But if they have an hour and a half, they're going to do, you know, what they have to do, and they're going to wreck the richness of the book usually.
Well, the good news is that even if the movie sucks, the book is still the book.
What'd you say?
I said, well, no, true. I mean, the book is still the book, but some authors, Sarah Paretsky, for example, had I think it was Sarah, really disliked a movie. And Elizabeth George, I tried to watch, and Louise Penny. I mean, awful. I mean, truly awful. The movie version. So, and some things are being remade for television that, you know, were a movie. For example, Jack Reacher is going to be turned into long form television. So
interesting. I wonder which book they're going to use.
I don't know. I really don't. There's a lot more of it coming. So, you know, it'll be fascinating to see how it all works out. Anyway, Catherine, has really been, as always, a treat. There's never enough time, and we always have fun. Perhaps next year you might actually be able to come see us, which would be really exciting.
That would be fun.
Wouldn't that be great? And then we might do a whole evening on Georgette Hare in addition to an evening about Sherlock and Savage. That might be my price. Anyhow, we do have autographed copies, and as Catherine will tell you, she actually signed inside the Vortex. Patrick can show you again because it's a very cool signature. So we still have a few left, so be sure you grab one. There'll be a podcast available of our talk tomorrow, and this will live on our Facebook page forever. So if you know anybody who missed our conversation, you can point them towards either the podcast or our Facebook page. So thank you, Catherine. Thanks for signing the books, and thanks for joining us.
Great seeing you again. Thank you, Patrick, for your help.
Thanks, Catherine. Great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.